While WWE has clearly seized the moment countless times over the company's lifespan, there are plentiful notable examples of the promotion having potential gold on their hands, only to choose to let that gold slip right through their fingers. I'm Andrew from What Culture Wrestling, and here are 10 such times WWE bungled wrestlers and storylines that had the possibility of making for truly memorable must-see television. Number 10. TAZ'S all-timer of a debut. When thinking of the greatest debuts in WWE history, names like Kane, Chris Jericho, AJ Styles, The Undertaker, and The Shield are just some of those who immediately spring to mind. Likewise in that conversation is ECW icon Taz. He may have had an extra Z added to his name, but make no mistake about it, the person seen at the 2000 Royal Rumble was every bit the badass Taz who had dominated in Extreme Championship Wrestling. A surprise opponent for Kurt Angle at a Royal Rumble pay-per-view which emanated from the legendary Madison Square Garden backyard of the New Yorker, Taz looked like a star, Taz worked like a star, and Taz was reacted to like he was a star during this all-timer of a debut. Not just did Taz bring an end to Angle's undefeated streak, but he did so in relentless clinical fashion, choking out the Olympic hero and immediately establishing himself as an excellent addition to the WWF roster. Skip ahead one year, and the Human Suplex Machine's involvement at the 2001 Royal Rumble saw him last just 10 seconds in that Royal Rumble bout. So, where did it go wrong for Taz? With management reportedly not keen on the stiff style of the Red Hook native, the former ECW World Champion found himself working with the likes of Pete Gas and Prince Albert on Heat and Jacked within less than a month of his debut. And if that wasn't bad enough, Taz would soon turn heel and become embroiled in a feud with the commentary duo of Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler. And with that, any hopes of seeing Taz become a big-time player in the then WWF were totally dashed. Number 9. The Hurt Business. While there continued to be rumblings to this day that the faction may be on the verge of reforming, there was absolutely zero reason to separate the Hurt Business towards the end of 2021 in the first place. As a unit, Bobby Lashley, MVP, Shelton Benjamin, and Cedric Alexander were fantastic, with the foursome perfectly complementing each other. Bobby being the world title contender, MVP being the phenomenal mouthpiece and hype man, and Benjamin and Alexander, two excellent in-ring workers who could be great assets either to the tag division or the singles ranks. For Lashley, it was his time in the Hurt Business that finally gave the Almighty the platform to win his first WWE Championship. Likewise, Shelton and Cedric managed to embark on a solid 85-day reign as the Raw Tag Team Champions during this time. All, of course, while Montel Vontavious Porter talked trash to the rest of the WWE roster. The Hurt Business were presented as bona fide stars, complete with their flash suits and the way in which they carried themselves on WWE programming. While Lashley has managed to have success since the Hurt Business, all three other members of the group have largely floundered, and even despite that success for Bobby, he still felt like a bigger player with MVP, Shelton Benjamin, and Cedric Alexander at his side. Number 8. Shayna Baszler on the main roster. Few acts in NXT history have been as dominant as Shayna Baszler was during her time in that developmental arm. And likewise, few NXT acts have had the ball dropped with them as badly as the Queen of Spades upon moving to the main roster. Having made a handful of appearances on Raw and SmackDown as part of Brand Wars, Baszler officially departed NXT in February 2020. Despite bizarrely debuting Shayna as a pseudo-vampire who took a bloody bite out of Becky Lynch, hey, at least the former UFC star was paired up against a major player in the form of The Man. The following month saw Baszler presented as an utter beast in the women's bout at the Elimination Chamber. Sarah Logan, Ruby Riott, Natalya, Liv Morgan, and most impressively, Asuka all tapped out or passed out at the hands of Shayna as she earned herself a shot at Becky Lynch's Raw Women's title at WrestleMania 36. Many presumed Shayna Baszler would topple Becky at that edition of the Showcase of the Immortals, and when she somewhat surprisingly came up short against Lynch, it didn't take long, unfortunately, for the former NXT Women's Champion to fall out of the spotlight. If Baszler had bested Becky Lynch at Mania 36, WWE would have had a killer heel at the top of its Red Brand's women's division. A killer heel with incredible believability and legitimacy. Instead, that opportunity was wasted, and we now find ourselves with a Shayna Baszler who, 3 years removed from that match, has still yet to hold singles gold on the main roster. Number 7. The Lex Express stalls at SummerSlam 93. The finish to the main event of SummerSlam 1993 remains one of the most bizarre decisions in WWE history. Having been presented as the second coming of Hulk Hogan ahead of this pay-per-view, Lex Luger's big moment ended up being a count-out win over WWF champion Yokozuna. The more bizarre nature of this though is that Luger had a full flag waving celebration in the ring after that match, complete with being hoisted up onto the shoulders of several notable babyfaces of the day. Would Lex Luger have made for a genuine money drawing babyface for the then World Wrestling Federation at a time when a section of fans were longing to see Bret Hart return to the top of the mountain? Who knows? Problem is, Lex Luger wasn't even given the chance to fail. Upon watching SummerSlam 93 back, the 24,000 fans in attendance at Michigan's Palace of Auburn Hills are actually passionately behind Lex. Adding to the atmosphere, the US national anthem was played before the match, and Luger even got an in-ring introduction from Randy Savage, where the Macho Man declared Lex as the next WWF champion. By Luger being so cheery and celebrating, ultimately coming up short in his quest to dethrone Yoko, the bloom was off the rose on the Lex Luger experiment. Another nail in the coffin would also be the response to Bret Hart when the Hitman and Lex were co-winners of the Royal Rumble the following January, and it would then of course be Bret Hart who would get the nod to finally topple Mr. Fuji's Yokozuna at WrestleMania 10. Number 6. Y2J World Champion. Of course, Chris Jericho had World Champion success a total of 6 times during his time with WWE. Unfortunately, none of those reigns came as a babyface, and in particular, the company missed a trick by not strapping up Jericho under his famed Y2J persona. What makes this even more jarring, the then WWF had the perfect moment to run with a babyface Jericho with the company's top prize. Heck, WWF even gave fans that perfect moment. That would be the 17th of April 2000 on an episode of Monday Night Raw. In the opening match of that edition of WWF's Monday flagship, Jericho shocked the world by defeating Triple H for the WWF Championship in front of a rabid Bryce Jordan Center crowd. To this day, Earl Hebner counting that 1, 2, 3 stands as one of the loudest reactions in Raw history. It's just a shame then that that decision would be reversed later in the show, with Triple H forcing Hebner to scratch the match and its result from the record books. Even though WWF opted to run a fake out here of Chris Jericho winning the world title, the reaction to Jericho should have told the market leader that fans were eager to see the Ayatollah of rock and roller at the top of the tree. The rivalry between the game and the Canadian would rumble on across the next few months, complete of course with an outstanding last man standing war at Fully Loaded, but WWF decided against pulling the trigger on Jericho as the world champion at this point. It would take in fact until October 2001 and a heel turn, plus the injury absence of Triple H, for Chris Jericho to get his first taste of World Championship gold. Number 5. John Cena nixes the Nexus. Wade Barrett is a fine commentator and is doing a great job calling the action on SmackDown these days. But instead of sitting at the commentary table as just a respective wrestler of yesteryear, Barrett should realistically be sat there as a multiple-time world champion. It's crazy to think how white hot the Nexus were for a spell, with the rookies of NXT shocking the wrestling world on the 7th of June 2010 episode of WWE Raw. There, these relative unknowns, and of course indie darling Bryan Danielson, decimated John Cena, CM Punk, Luke Gallows, Jerry Lawler, Matt Striker, Mark Eaton, Justin Roberts' tie, and laid waste to the entire ringside area in a way never before seen. The Nexus had arrived, and arrived in a major way, immediately marking themselves out as a major deal as they targeted the biggest stars of the day. With Wade Barrett the leader of this group, it was he who was positioned as a genuine world title contender. Unfortunately for Wade and his boys though, the wind was taken out of the Nexus at SummerSlam 2010. On that August night, the faction came up short in a 14-man main event elimination match against Team WWE. In particular, it was John Cena left standing tall as the sole survivor of this contest, and it's been noted in the years since how Cena himself regrets not having the Nexus emerge as the victors in this match. From there, the dents were in the armor of the Nexus, Barrett would come up short in any matches of note basically, and the group became just another run-of-the-mill collection of mid-card heels. As such, the future Bad News stands as a 5-time Intercontinental Champion, whereas really, if WWE struck when the iron was hot, the Englishman could well be regaled as a 5-time World Champion. Number 4. That post-Mania buzz around Dolph Ziggler. Bar Seth Rollins' heist of the century at WrestleMania 31, Dolph Ziggler is the person with the greatest Money in the Bank cash-in in WWE history. When Ziggler's music hit on the Raw after WrestleMania 29, New Jersey's Izod Center lost its collective mind as the show-off headed to the ring, flanked by AJ Lee and Big E Langston. By this point in time, Ziggler had long been viewed as not only one of WWE's smoothest in-ring workers, but also also a worker who was forever undervalued by the company. Sure, he'd had the briefest of brief cups of coffee with the World Heavyweight Championship, holding that belt for less than an episode of SmackDown back in February 2011, but fans had started to clamour for Dolph to get a proper run as a main event act and as a world champion. And when WWE decided to have the real-life Nick Nemeth cash in on Alberto Del Rio the night after Mania, it looked for all the world as if the company was finally going to make the most of the increasing support behind Ziggler. While it was longer than his first run with the world title, Dolph's second reign as World Heavyweight Champion only clocked in at 70 days. Added to that, he didn't have one successful title defense, and he was absent from TV for a whole month before dropping Big Gold back to Del Rio at WWE Payback that June. Of course, the reason for that TV absence was down to a concussion suffered at the hands of Jack Swagger, and that absence reportedly resulted in Vince McMahon labeling poor Ziggler as injury prone. But even then, when WWE would later place Ziggler in major spots, such as having Dolph be the sole survivor in the Survivor Series 2014 main event, the promotion would still do zero to capitalize on any momentum generated by poor Dolph. Number 3, Sami Zayn's Montreal moment. On the pre-Elimination Chamber episode of SmackDown earlier this year, Sami Zayn had a truly magical Montreal moment. The following night at the premium live event itself, the hometown hero had several magical Montreal moments. But the problem is, he didn't have the ultimate magical Montreal moment. That would have come with Sami toppling the nefarious Roman Reigns and becoming the new undisputed WWE Universal Champion. Sure, Zayn could well end up with a world title to his name at some point in the future, but Elimination Chamber was one of those rare, special aligning of the stars where WWE had the potential to capture lightning in a bottle. An organically over underdog babyface who we've all been wanting to see the light of merely being a pawn for Reigns and the Bloodline as part of WWE's greatest storyline for nearly a decade, and that scrappy undersized underdog got to have the biggest fight of his life in front of his own utterly rabid people. This really was once in a lifetime, and WWE opted to not pull the trigger on what would have been one of the loudest pops in company history. Again, WWE probably will end up taking a chance on Sami Zayn with a world title before the Canadian hangs up his boots, particularly if and when the undisputed WWE Universal Championship reverts to two separate entities. But any such big win will not be as magical as it would have been on that Montreal night in front of that Montreal crowd as part of this exquisite, lengthy storyline. Number 2, the Black Heart. Some would argue that Owen Hart should have had a run as the WWF champion during his stunning feud with his brother Bret that began in 1993 and ran through until the end of 1994. While that could well be true, Owen was a heel there and so didn't exactly have fans clamoring to see him overcome the Hitman. Skipping ahead to late 1997 though, and Owen Hart found himself in the position of being one of the hottest acts in the entire business. Of course, this came in the aftermath of the Montreal screwjob. So, with Bret Hart having headed to WCW, Brian Pillman tragically having passed away a month prior to Montreal, and Davey Boy Smith and Jim Neidhart having been allowed out of their contracts to join Bret in WCW, Owen found himself as the lone Hart Foundation member left in the WWF. For whatever reason, Vince McMahon refused to let the youngest Hart brother out of his current deal. But Owen's re-emergence after the 97 Survivor Series, well, that had the potential to make him a true top-tier talent and main event mainstay. Of course, that re-emergence came a month after that infamous Montreal night, with Owen returning at the end of December's D-Generation X in Your House event. There, Owen beat the absolute piss out of Shawn Michaels, before then exiting through the crowd. Here he was, Owen Hart, the last Hart standing, who was out to avenge the treatment of his family. The prospect of Owen Hart versus Shawn Michaels in a lengthy personal feud, that was mouthwatering, and Hart's return showed an entirely new, serious, aggressive side to the former Rocket, as he likewise butted heads with Vince McMahon in addition to the Heartbreak Kid. From there though, Owen and Shawn would have just one TV match, a DQ win for Owen, before the Black Heart was transitioned into a brief rivalry with Triple H ahead of becoming a part of the Nation of Domination. And boy, what a missed opportunity this was. Number 1, the Invasion. The war between WCW and the WWF was a pivotal part in the wrestling boom scene in the 90s, with the battles between those rival companies driving TV ratings, the likes of which are unfathomable when looking at the current numbers drawn by WWE and AEW. If such a boom period was experienced when WCW and WWF were on real-life opposing sides, imagine what could be possible with both rosters under the same banner and positioned against each other in a kayfabe made sense. Pro Wrestling Gold, that was the hope. Unfortunately, that hope turned to disappointment rather quickly after WWF's assimilation of WCW in early 2001. It was unimaginable that adding the likes of Goldberg, Sting, the NWO, Macho Man Randy Savage, Scott Steiner, DDP, Booker T, Lex Luger, Vampiro, Rey Mysterio, adding those names to the stacked WWF roster, how could that not work out? And that's where the problems began, for DDP and Booker T were the only two of those names to join WWF as part of the invasion. For the other talents, the market leader refused to pay the relevant amount needed to buy out their hefty AOL Time Warner contracts. Sure, those contracts were extremely hefty, but if WWF wasn't prepared to match those deals, it was daft to try and run any sort of WCW invasion when the star power just simply wasn't there to present WCW as any sort of genuine on-screen rival to the WWF. What was once a dream scenario for wrestling fans, it ultimately became just another frustrating story based around the McMahon family. Likewise, in order to pad out the WCW side and eventually an ECW contingent to join with WCW, a bunch of WWF stars switched their allegiances to the Alliance in pretty bungled fashion for the most part. So there are 10 times that WWE has massively dropped the ball over the years. If you have any other examples of such daft mistakes, be sure to let us know in the comment section. While you're here, be sure to like, subscribe, turn those notification bells on, and come and give us a follow on Twitter at WorldCultureWWE. If you want, you can come and get myself a follow at Cultured Left Peg. But most importantly, I hope you're having the best possible day. Whether you're doing something, whether you're doing nothing, I hope it goes well for you. And if things aren't going so well, I really hope they start to turn around as soon as possible. With that, I've been Andrew Parlow from What Culture Wrestling, and I'll catch you down the road.